But I want to talk about haste today. And I want to connect it to to a scripture, but another word that I believe we need to be more intentional with that sounds a lot like haste, but it's not. So haste means this: a rapidity of motion or swiftness, or rash or headlong action. Rash or headlong action, or an undue eagerness to act. So I want you to take the full breadth of that definition, if you will. There's specifically the two. The rash action is one that I think we're like, well, I don't take haste because I don't take rash actions. But then think about the second part of that, the undue eagerness to act. Because here's what I'm talking about. I don't think if you know anything about the two types of energy, there is potential energy and then there's kinetic energy. Potential is the ability to move, but without moving. It's it's in you, but if you're not moving, it's potential. But the moment you start moving, then your kinetic energy is moving. And I think we get into a place of haste where we don't understand our potential energy because we constantly are required to have kinetic energy. But like anything, if your kinetic energy is good, like let's say you have a downhill and you roll a rock downhill, it's in kinetic. But at the top of the hill, before you go down the hill, that's potential because it's not moving. But as soon as you move it, it's gone. Um, but many of us are going crazy and we're relying on the world around us to move us or drive us. And in that space of eventually that's got to run out. We're not always going to be operating in a downhill motion. So when the kinetic energy rolls out, then where is the potential energy? But it's in this broken mindset of this undue eagerness to act because you constantly have to be acting, that you miss the moments of rest. You miss the moments that prepare you, the buildup of something to position you, because as anybody knows, if you don't get sleep, you're generally going to run out of gas in some point or another. If you don't fill the tank in your car, eventually you're going to run out of gas, right? So why do we think that we are no different? Like we can just continue to run and go, but there's really strength in taking the moments to rest, to breathe, to evaluate what the next step is. Because if you don't take those moments, then you can find yourself moving at a pace based on what somebody else is doing. You can find yourself based on making decisions based on what other people are doing. And you really don't have a focus on how fast you're supposed to go, on what you should be doing, because you're letting other people drive you, control you, move you. This is where haste gets us in trouble because, as the definition said again, rash or headlong action. What that means is we're moving without any intention. We're moving as a result of what somebody else is doing. Have you ever been in that place in your life? Maybe it's with your kids and you just are constantly moving or doing because your kids are constantly moving and doing. It's like I said earlier, if you have toddlers, you know what I'm talking about. You sleep when the babies sleep because when they're up, you're in the middle of a hasty season. You got to constantly be on top of it. You can't let a baby that's crawling just go about their own way. Like you got to be on it. So there is seasons of haste, I believe, but in that moment, then you have to be very intentional when it slows down, and you have to really take control of the slow down moments. But then if you compare it to life and business and even ministry, then we can get to a place where haste becomes the norm, knowingly or unknowingly, where we're constantly responding, reacting, and we have no intentionality on where we're going, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. So I want to go to the scripture, and I want to give you this this lens, if you will, to come back to another word. There's two that I want to say. Proverbs 21:5 says, the plans of the diligent. I want to hear that word again. Diligent. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance. Now, if I asked a business owner what he's looking to have, I would probably say that most would say, I would love to have an abundance. Abundance is what they're seeking, right? So the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty only comes to poverty. And I think this really comes back to management. Who's managing your time, your money, your resources? Because all those go in together. Is it you, or is it someone else? This is where hasty movements, rash or headlong actions, running into something because something's driving you, you're not driving yourself, that puts you into a place where, according to this scripture, poverty is your future because you're probably going to run out of gas. You're going to run out of desire. You're going to run out of the ability or the desire to do what you're doing because you're going to be tired, worn out, or somebody's going to constantly do it better than you. You'll feel less than. You get the identity complex where you're constantly struggling to be something you're not and always falling short. But the word diligent stands out. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance. So let's look at the word diligent. What does that mean? Because I think realistically, although diligence what we've intended to be or what we want to be, hasty has been where we're at. Hasty is the speed of the world around us. It is what we see many people doing, spinning their wheels, constantly going. You can find it all over social. You can find it all over social media, and people have just become the norm. Well, it's diligent. No, it's haste. If you really look at it, why are you making the moves? Are you doing it because you want to, because you need to, or are you doing it because somebody else is doing it and you're trying to keep up with the Benjamins? So let's see what diligent is. Diligent means characterized by steady, earnest, and energetic effort. Okay, steady, earnest, and energetic effort. We're going to go right in the middle there. Earnest. What does earnest mean? And then we're not talking about Earnest Saves Christmas. And if you don't know what that means, then you're really not as old as I am, and God bless you. I would not even suggest that you go back and watch Ernest Saves Christmas or Ernest Goes to Camp. It was one of those shows when I was a kid that was funny at the time, but it was really a bit of a train wreck. So if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, just move right on from this conversation and say, okay, we're gonna carry on. So Ernest, characterized by or proceeding from an intense and serious state of mind. Important, a serious and intent mental state, a considerable or impressive degree or amount. So earnest is, I'm going to use a different word and say intentional. Intent. It's not busy, it's intentional. So then, characterized by steady, intentional, and energetic effort. See, when you have the intent and somebody else is not driving you, that's when you can do earnest work. But if you're constantly looking at somebody else, doing what you do to compare to them, to be better than them, that's not earnest. It has no intent. Well, it does have an intent, but you don't know what it is because you're merely operating off somebody else. So your intent is lost because you're basing off somebody else's intent.